Hey everybody, it's Joe, the 3D printing professor, and for a lot of people, when they get into 3D printing, they get the dollar signs in their eyes and think this machine is going to be my path to, well, to making a little bit of money. But then they hear about copyright and they hear about Creative Commons and they hear that the law's involved and they start to get a little bit nervous and think, wait, can I actually sell 3D prints or will I get into a lot of trouble if I try? And I want to answer that question today. But before I start, let me just preface this by saying I'm not a lawyer. I learned this stuff at first when I went to college, and if you were to go to art school, you would probably take a similar course to learn how copyright affects the creative arts and things like that. And then I did a little bit of study outside of school and used that to build a playlist of videos, which you can watch here on YouTube. But in this video, let's just say I'm not offering legal advice. This is just general information that hopefully will answer the big question of can I sell 3D prints? Now, I'm going to answer this question in layers. We're going to start at the highest layer right now, and I'm going to answer this one like a dad and say, why, yes, you can sell 3D prints. There's nothing inherently illegal about the 3D printing process that would make it impossible for you to sell something that was 3D printed. So, yes, you can sell 3D prints. However, depending on what you're selling, you might want to be a little bit careful. So, this leads to the next question. Okay, what sort of things could you sell? Now, I'm going to break this into three categories. The first category are when somebody comes to you with an STL and asks you to print it. The second category is when you choose what you're selling to people, either on demand or you pre print it and give it to people. It doesn't matter, but it's something that you've made yourself original. And then there's the very commonplace where you go and find somebody else's design online and you want to sell that one. So, in that first category, if somebody comes to you either because you're advertising that, hey, I can do print services and there's like, cool, I want this printed, then you're kind of an employee for the duration of the job. You've negotiated a price, they've paid you, you do the job and give them the thing. You're just the tool that they're using to get something done. So any legal question that needs to be answered usually, mostly, and for the most part, falls on the person who hired you to do it. And you, as the employee, as the tool, hold very little, almost no legal liability. And I say almost no because there's always exceptions. If you see or notice that the thing that they're asking you to print is something that would be illegal for you to possess in the place that you are, then you probably, and you have the right to say, no, I'm not going to do this. You have the right to tell somebody that to refuse a job. You're not a slave. You can accept or decline the jobs as you want. However, in this case, it's kind of a case of the less you know, the less you're liable. Liable? Anyways, the less that you know, the more you can get away with in a way, and the more that that responsibility passes on up to the other person. You don't have to ask any questions. In fact, it's probably best for you not to ask any questions and just to say, yeah, okay, and maybe look over the file to make sure that it's printable. But beyond that, the less you know, probably the better off you are. You don't need to ask them, like, well, have you got a license for this? Have you got the rights for that? Let them worry about that. That's their responsibility. And whatever they do with it, don't ask, do the job, and you don't have much in the way of responsibility in this one. So this is maybe the best case scenario. However, this is not a common way to make money nowadays because anybody who has the capability and wherewithal to make a 3D print file, chances are they will just get a 3D printer and do it themselves. Or if somebody's downloading files online, they'll do it one time, and that's probably all that they'll do with you. So more common is that you're going to present people with a list of options or something, and you're going to say, hey, here's some things that I can make. And if you're choosing what you're making, or if you're pre-making stuff and trying to sell it, well, now we got to think a little bit about your responsibility. And if it's something that you've made, that's original, that's your thing, well, then it's yours. You can do anything that you want with it. You can choose who you sell it to. You can choose if it gets sold. You can distribute the files so that other people can print them or not. It's entirely up to you. Now, there are, of course, caveats with this one. And if you have based your design on somebody else's idea, for instance, here's a cute little character that I designed. I made the 3D models completely original work. I didn't take from anybody else's 3D model, and I just kind of took the idea of a popular character that you might recognize and made it fully 3D printable. Notice how all the overhangs are kind of going up just a little bit. What is usually a long eye stalk has been shoved back so that it's perfectly 3D printable. This was designed to 3D print very small as well, just kind of a pawn. But do I own this character? Do I even own this version of this character? The answer is not as much as you might think. Because it was based on somebody else's idea, they kind of get to claim, if they wanted to, if they were to, ownership of at least the part. The general idea of this is theirs, and so I kind of lose the right to do whatever I want with this if they were to exercise their rights with it. Now, we'll talk about the possibility of that, but I just wanted to show this as an example. Despite the fact that I put a lot of work into this, that doesn't matter. Despite the fact that it's an original rendition, that might not matter very much. Because I based it on somebody else's work, I really can't claim to have complete ownership over this and ability to do whatever I want with it. Now, likewise, if somebody else has made the 3D model, if they've done it completely and you're just downloading it and printing it, well, then it's theirs. They get the right to choose whether or not you can sell it or put it out there or even use it. And so how do you know what the creator's intent is for this model? And that's what the Creative Commons license was created. It was created so that creators could communicate intent when they put a thing out there for other people to use. Otherwise, all rights would be reserved to the original creator. And even if you just 3D printed it, they would say, no, I just wanted you to look at it. I just put it out here for you to see, even though I put the download file. This has never been tested in court. Nobody's ever tried testing this in court. And I don't want any of you to become the precedent that sets, but the Creative Commons basically says, yes, I'm releasing this out there and I want you to use it for certain purposes. And so just follow the Creative Commons license and you're fine. But the Creative Commons license has a couple of gotchas attached to it that you really need to be aware of. For instance, the Creative Commons license, in the Creative Commons license says that whatever you use this thing that you downloaded that was, listed with the Creative Commons license, you need to take that thing that you made with it and link back to the Creative Commons license. So if you take it, obvious examples are if you take a video or file and you display it on your own website, you need to put on there the Creative Commons license that says this is under the Creative Commons license. But how do you do that when you're 3D printing something physical? And the answer is you need a physical link back to it. So get a piece of paper, or maybe it's a whole sheet of paper, print links back to the Creative Commons license. Some people even use QR codes, cut them up, punch a hole in them, and rubber band them to your thing. That is how you fulfill the requirements of the Creative Commons license at its base level. You have to think about this in order to be compliant with the Creative Commons license as the Creative Commons license is written. Does everybody do this? Not really, but according to the Creative Commons license, you should. There's another gotcha with the Creative Commons license, because the Creative Commons license is kind of piecemeal and you can choose and pick and what clauses get put into there. And most Creative Commons licenses have the BY clause on there. That's an attribution clause. It basically says you have to give credit to the original creator, the original author. So you could just add that to your piece of paper. This thing is this thing. It was created by this person. Boom. The BY attribution is taken care of with that one. But what about the NC license? Yeah, there's also an NC, which means non-commercial, which means that the creator has said they want you to have this thing, they want you to use this thing, but they don't want you to make money from this thing. Now, we could get into a whole thing about this. If I take this 3D model and I use it to sell my 3D printer, use it to show off how well my 3D printer prints, is that in violation of the NC clause? I don't know. If we take this thing, we take pictures of the prints of this thing and we use it in something else that we're using to make money, but we're not actually selling the prints, I don't know. Now, Creative Commons has other clauses to it, usually related to how you can share the file, and if you share the file, and if you make a change to the file, or if you can make a change to the file before you share it, if the author intends for that to be a possibility. All of these things can be listed in the Creative Commons license, but these two are the two that you're really going to want to pay attention to and comply to. Now, if there's a NC clause under, does that mean that you can't sell it ever under any circumstance? No. It means that you need to contact the creator, let them know your circumstance and situation, and say, hey, in this circumstance, in this situation, what do you want so that I can go ahead and sell it? Maybe they'll ask you for licensing, and maybe they'll ask you to make a donation to whatever, maybe they'll ask you to join their Patreon at a certain level. But whatever that requirement is, you need to contact the creator and find out. That's what the NC means, is don't sell it until you've talked to me. Now, sometimes you'll contact the creator, they'll say this, that, whatever reason, or they'll say no, and you're not willing to do that. Well, then don't sell that model. Just go, well, okay, enough is enough. That one's not going to happen, and do something else. There's lots of models out there that you can check out. However, a third however on here is, and I've heard this argument before. People are like, no, wait a second. If this model was based on somebody else's idea, then technically they don't have copyright to it. They don't have the right to make the Creative Commons license on here. Therefore, the Creative Commons license is null and void. Correct, I guess. Therefore, I can do whatever I want with it. Not correct. Because if you're trying to argue that the original creator doesn't have the right to their work, that doesn't mean that that right passes to you either. So if you're going to argue that they don't have the right, then you're also arguing that you don't have the right. So don't do it, right? Just use a little bit of common sense with these things, and don't try and edge yourself around the rules. Now, what if you check out a thing, there's no Creative Commons license attached to it, you have no idea what the author intends? Then ask them. Go to the author and say, hey, I found your file, I want it through. Maybe the file wasn't even made for 3D printing. They've never even considered this possibility. Talk to them, reach out to them, find out what they want before you do anything. So, people have sometimes tried to argue that 3D printing a thing transforms it, and under the copyright law, transformative things get a new license for the person who's doing the transforming, and that's not exactly correct. See, transformative doesn't mean changing the thing from one medium to another. If you change it from one medium to another, the only thing that you own is the part of that you have created new. So, for instance, if I were to take the latest John Grisham novel, is John Grisham still making novels? Doesn't matter. I get that novel and I read it and I record a copy of it and I decide that I can sell my audio recording because it's my own original performance. Yeah, I own that performance, but I don't own the copyright on the words that I was performing in this case. That the work, I would still need to get permission from the John Grisham estate, whatever, to be able to do that. You only own, and so that means that one thing can have multiple people claiming a part of that copyright. It's kind of wild, but just moving it from one medium to another doesn't change who owns the rights to it. Part of that came from somebody else's work, and so they still own that part of it. Well, what happens if I take it and remix it and change it in some way so that it's something else? Kind of the same answer. You own the part that you did, but they still own the part that it was based on. And so if you've based it on somebody else's work, they still get to make a claim on it. So you can't take something, download it, remesh it even, as long as the part of it is recognizable as somebody else's work, that part is theirs. Now there are strange caveats for functional parts, because functional parts don't get copyright automatically on them. They have to be protected by patent. So if you take a functional part and remix it, then you kind of get ownership of the whole thing. But that's an edge case. We're talking about artistic parts. We're talking about generally speaking, and where's that line drawn? Like, there's been a lot of argument for it, and quite frankly, it's really, really hard to say for sure that that's functional and that's artistic, especially in 3D prints, where those two ideas can be blended into one. So, if you feel like getting as close to the line as you can, there's a line that you can tiptoe around. But for the most part, I always like to say, hey, if somebody else made it and I'm using it, they get credit for the part of it that I'm using, because I appreciate the work and time that they put into it, notwithstanding the work and time that I added to it myself. Now, some people will talk about this 10% rule, or maybe it's a 20% rule. Actually, I've heard it said 30%. No, it's definitely 20%. It's nothing. It's a myth. This idea has come from certain artists who took a piece of work and they changed it and added stuff to it, and then they got away with it. Like, they took it to courts, and the court said, yep, that is a new and original work. It was based on a previous work, but you have changed it enough that it is now recognizable as its own work. But then there are other artists who take a work and change it into a different medium, add color, sculpt it all by hand from a picture. They've changed the entire work, and the court still said, nah, too close to the original. Like, they put a lot of work into this. So this 10%, 20%, whatever percent rule, it's a myth. It doesn't exist. And what would 20% of a change in a 3D file even mean? Are we talking like an additional 20% in file size? If you remeshed it so the pixels weren't in the same place, but the total geometry was more or less the same, wouldn't that be a complete change in it on the lower level? There is no 20% rule. Don't try and play that game again. You're talking about skirting close to the edge, but this edge doesn't exist. It's pretend. Well, fair use or parody are protected by copyright, and that's true, but it's really difficult to make an argument for fair use or parody, and it really depends on... Well, I got these questions off of Nolo.com's legal encyclopedia, and these 5 questions here are a great way to demonstrate. They're things that you should think about before you try to argue whether or not it's fair use or parody. And even these, all that they really do is illustrate how difficult it is to make that argument. Now, another loophole in copyright is for educational purposes, and educational purposes honestly get away with quite a lot. If you're a teacher and you're using this to teach people, you can sometimes get around copyright a lot. But if you're trying to use that educational clause and say, but I'm selling this at my school, no, you're not teaching it. Just because it happens in a school doesn't mean that it's educational. Wow, that sounds like advice for life. So let's get down to it. How much trouble could you possibly get into? And the answer is, if you want to be scared, if you want to really understand how frightening this could be, Google punitive damages. Punitive damages are different depending on where you are, the exact bar, but it's a number value. It's a this much money. What does it mean? It means that if you are taken to court And if you lose, if the judge says, yes, the other person is correct, that is the minimum amount of money that you will have to pay. Even if you've only made $10, even if you've only made $100, the punitive damages are going to say, that's fine. You owe them that much money. And it is a scary amount of money. And that's the intent of it. Punitive damages are there to prevent people from even being willing to push it just a little bit, because if it goes to court, if the judge has to deal with it, if lawyers get involved, this is the bar that you're going to walk away from hurting. And it's a lot more than you might think. However, are you actually going to get in trouble? Is this really a possibility? All right, this is the part where I am definitely not giving legal advice, okay? I don't want anybody to go out there and say, well, Joe said, no. The legal answer is don't push it. Now that you know the rules, don't try and push it as far as you can. But the reality is that there are lots of people who are doing this sort of thing, sometimes innocently, sometimes less innocently, and they're getting away with it all the time. Usually because they're so small that, the person who owns the copyright looks at them and says, man, if I were to bother to sue them, I wouldn't be able to collect on anything, even if I won. And so they just let it go, or they don't care. In this case, the worst thing that could happen is you actually become successful enough that they will take notice of you. Because if you get successful, they'll get dollar signs in their eyes and they'll go, okay, let's go see if we can collect from these people. Now, I should say on here, if you go out and are selling stuff and it was a model made by somebody else and they send you a cease and desist email, if they contact you and say, hey, stop doing this, take that very, very seriously, because it means that you've been noticed. And the next step after this is them, well, is setting legal precedent at this point, actually, is going to court and seeing what the courts say on this one. So if you ever get somebody who notices you, be contrite. Say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. I'll take that down. And do take it down. Do not leave it up, because you don't want to deal with that. You've been noticed. You've been spotted. Time to back off, okay? So let's review. If somebody hires you to do a 3D print, you're probably fine to do the work for them. Most of their legal responsibility rests with them. But if you're deciding what you're making, you may need to be careful. If it's something original that you've made based on your own original idea, that is the safest bet, and you have all the rights pertaining to that thing. If there's a Creative Commons license, respect it as best you can. If there's not a license, or if the author has not communicated their intent, then talk to the author, the original creator, and say, hey, I got this idea. And generally speaking, don't try and skirt the line as close as you can. Keep yourself safe. That is the best thing to do. But in the end, you'll probably be fine. I hope that this has helped you. I hope that this has given you a little bit of confidence in what you can and can't do, and given you maybe some ideas of the cool things that you can do. I want to thank you very much for watching and say, yes, my tie is, in fact, chainmail.